Hi, folks. Let's talk about the circus we're all living in right now, because if Democrats in 2025 had a Yelp page, it would be flagged for cultural schizophrenia and ideological malpractice. We're in this bizarre moment where the people screaming the loudest about tolerance are also the ones justifying racial hatred, as long as it's wrapped in the right hashtags. The same folks who spent years warning us about dangerous rhetoric are now casually daydreaming about saving the country from white people, as if that's just your average MSDNC brunch special. And the kicker? They say it loud and proud on national TV and expect applause instead of consequences. So buckle up. We're diving into the greatest hits of unhinged progressivism, where victimhood is currency, logic is hate speech, and the only thing consistent is a double standard.
This election has proven, that this administration has proven painfully in some ways, is that Black people cannot save this country from white folks. We can't do it alone, right? If white folks aren't going to join in, if white women aren't going to join in, if Latinos aren't going to join in, we can't do it alone.
That is genocidal ideology, and you can't convince me otherwise. When anyone says this country needs to be saved from fill-in-the-blank type of people, in this case white people, they're not making a clumsy appeal for justice. They're trafficking in racial essentialism with a smile. Strip away the buzzwords and historical guilt, and what you're left with is a raw, dehumanizing worldview that salvation comes through shared ideals or individual responsibility, but through the scapegoating of an entire race. We've heard this script before. Just swap the target and the continent. What Elie Mystal is promoting here isn't progress. It's regression cloaked in moral superiority. And what's worse is that he's not some fringe lunatic in an internet forum. He's a regular media commentator with a platform, a paycheck, and applause from the same institutions that lecture the rest of us about democracy, unity, and decency. This is the logical end of the left's decades-long experiment in identity politics, a worldview where morality is determined by melanin, history is rewritten by hashtags, and redemption is granted only to those who kneel, confess, and comply. And this didn't come out of nowhere. For years, elite institutions, academia, legacy media, corporate HR departments all over the country and the world now have pumped out a steady stream of racialized ideology under the guise of equity. Anti-racism became a Trojan horse for literal resegregation. White privilege was reframed as the original sin. And now we're supposed to pretend that open hostility toward an entire group is somehow enlightened if it's wrapped in just the right trauma narrative. If a white commentator had said this country needs to be saved from Black people, there would be literal riots, firings, congressional resolutions, and probably a federal task force led by every Democrat under the sun. But because the targets are white, it's treated as edgy insight instead of dangerous bigotry. The truth is, this brand of rhetoric doesn't threaten white people. It threatens the very idea of America, the idea that individuals are judged by their character, not their ancestry or the color of their skin, the idea that justice is colorblind, not selectively applied depending on whose side is trending on social media. The left sold the country on moral relativism, and now they're morally bankrupt, and they know it. That's why the volume is going up. The language is getting more extreme and the targets are expanding, because deep down, they sense that the ideological ground beneath their feet is literally crumbling. Their grip on culture, once unquestioned, is slipping. People are just tuning out. They're not listening. And when power slips, the mask falls off. So what we're seeing is the end result of decades of cultural capture and moral cowardice. The people who told us that words are violence now use words that would make a white supremacist blush. David Duke is wondering how the Democrats are now out racisting him. But I don't think he's wondering too hard, because after all, they are the Dixiecrats. These are the same Democrats who cried over dog whistles and are now blowing foghorns of racial hatred and calling it liberation. So let me be clear. This country is not going to be saved from any racial group. It's going to be saved by people of all backgrounds who refuse to bow to this toxic, corrosive ideology, who reject both white guilt and racial revenge, the politics of grievance, and instead choose common sense over collective blame. This Marxist BS isn't going to fix America. What's going to fix America is when ideologues like this stop trying to punish half the country for their perceived sins that are carried with their skin color, and start rebuilding on the truth that made this country worth saving in the first place. And since we're on the topic of race hustlers, The mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, is by far one of the luminaries of that movement founded by Al Sharpton.
Real Chicagoans woke up this morning relieved that the Department of Justice is finally investigating your race hustle.
Oh.
As someone who grew up on the south side of Chicago, I've heard a lot of race hustlers in my life, trust me. But they were usually marching around outside of City Hall, which is what makes this so embarrassing and dangerous. Very, very dangerous to the city of Chicago.
Okay, we need the question.
I'm more than happy to ask this question. It's long overdue. For over a year, real Chicagoans, white and black, have been telling me that your black power rhetoric is bringing the city backwards from a place that
We need the question.
had overcome. You want the question?
Please.
Real Chicagoans want to know, why are you a racist?
Boom.
Well, first of all, I reject the idea and the premise that somehow that's an actual legitimate question.
Of course.
Want that?
All right, we're going to go to the next one. Alice?
The next question, my follow-up question is a businessman, Robert Gomez, had his riverfront restaurant license yanked. You said that the reason you hire black people is because they're the most generous race on the planet. His riverfront restaurant license was yanked and given to a black restaurateur. That has, once again, reinforced the belief among real Chicagoans,
Okay.
white and black
We need
and
the
Mexican,
question.
that you are a racist. What do you say to those people?
Again, I reject the premise that somehow that your question has any legitimacy. Thank you for your time, sir.
What a genuinely awful and evil human being. Now, if you'll remember, yesterday we looked at clips where the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, openly admitted to using race as a determining factor in who gets hired, who gets contracts, and who gets access to city resources. This isn't speculation. It's not a right-wing smear, a conspiracy theory. This man said it on camera, grinning, unbothered, and the world watched. And we listened. And one day later, a brave citizen finally had the guts to say what millions of Americans are thinking. Why are you racist? Not behind a keyboard, not in an anonymous op-ed, but right to his face. And of course, Johnson didn't answer because he can't, because deep down, he knows it's true. He is racist, Jim Crow level racist. His entire political posture is built on a toxic racial hierarchy where guilt is assigned by skin tone and power is redistributed through identity, not merit. That's not leadership. That's revenge dressed up as progress. What we're witnessing in Chicago is a symptom of a deeper cultural rot, one that's infected city halls, school boards, universities, and corporate boardrooms all across the country and the world. From Los Angeles to New York to Miami, the left abandoned universal values a long time ago. They stopped believing in color blindness, equality under the law, or the rule of law, or even shared citizenship. Instead, they embraced a crude moral framework where oppression is permanent, identity is destiny, and justice doesn't mean empowering those less fortunate. It means tearing the entire system down so you can place yourself at the top and rewrite the rules in your own favor. Brandon Johnson is exactly what happens when that ideology, that leftist Marxist ideology, takes power. He's not some rogue radical. He's a logical outcome of a political movement that teaches people to hate their country, despise their neighbors, and treat historical grievance as a license to discriminate. It's the same mentality that fuels DEI bureaucracies, race-based hiring quotas, and the soft bigotry of low expectations. It's not about lifting anyone up. It's about tearing down those who don't fit their narrative. And here's the real kicker. The people being hurt by this aren't just white business owners like Robert Gomez, who had his restaurant license stripped and handed to a politically favored competitor. It's Americans across the country. Whether you're black, white, Latino, or Asian, you're watching Democrat-run cities spiral into lawlessness, incompetence, and division. From the black residents who don't get picked for contracts because they're not politically connected, to the Latino families whose neighborhoods get ignored because they don't fit the current messaging, and the white families being told they don't count at all because they're racist. That's not equity. That's institutionalized bigotry, plain and simple. It's the South African playbook implemented in America. But the tide is turning. People are fed up. The language games don't work anymore. Words like equity or diversity have become warning labels, not ideals. They're red flags. And as more Americans watch leaders like Brandon Johnson dodge accountability, refuse to defend their own ideology and policies, and double down on racial favoritism, we're all waking up to this scam. The myth of moral authority on the left is crumbling. And when it collapses, it won't be rebuilt. Because the future of this country can't be dictated by people who treat fairness like a flaw and justice like a zero-sum game. It will be built by those who demand better, who see each other not as racial tribes or grievance groups, but as citizens bound by law, dignity, and truth. And judging by the sound of that real Chicagoan in the room, that future may be closer than the race hustlers think. And this wouldn't be a real discussion about race hustlers if we didn't take a pause and see what kind of mind-numbing BS Sunny Hostin is spewing out over there on The View.
The Trump administration allowed in 59 white South African refugees into this country, claiming that they were fleeing racial discrimination and land appropriation. So the South African president has been actively, denying that persecution. He says a refugee is someone who has to leave their country out of fear of political persecution, religious persecution, or economic persecution. They don't fit that bill.
You sure about that?
We've not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal call.
Cry babies. I'm
not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now.
I can't give a guarantee of the future, especially when things are going the way they are.
Subtext.
Especially if things are going the way they are, there will be a revolution in this country, I can tell you now.
Shoot to kill. Yamaza. Kill the poor. The farmer, kill the poor, the farmer.
Make no mistake, folks. Sunny Hostin and the rest of the professional race hustlers are making it clearer than ever. This was never about equality. It was always about revenge, power, and double standards so deep they border on psychosis. When Hostin goes on national television to denounce the United States for granting asylum to 59 white South African refugees, she's not spreading ignorance. She's telling you in plain terms that some lives are simply less worthy of protection. Apparently, if you're white and in danger, it doesn't count to people like Sunny. Now, let's be crystal clear about what's actually happening here. These are people fleeing a country where political leaders like Julius Malema, as we saw in the clips following Sunny's statements, have said publicly and repeatedly, we're not calling for the killing of white people, at least not for now. Imagine that being said about any other group and brushed off as no big deal. Imagine a conservative figure in the United States saying the same thing about Black Americans or Latinos. The media would burn down the airwaves. Congress would hold emergency hearings, but because it's white South Africans, we're told it's all just economic redistribution. And if you object, you're racist. That's not just hypocrisy, it's just pure evil. The cultural rot we're seeing here runs deep. The left has spent decades redefining concepts like refugee, oppression, and justice to fit a racial narrative instead of reality. Under the old rules, if you were being persecuted because of your identity, any identity, you qualified for asylum. But under these new rules, persecution only counts if you're the right kind of victim. If your skin color or political alignment doesn't check, the suffering you're facing is either denied or deserved. That's not compassion, that's bloodthirsty tribalism. Now, Hostin parrots the talking points of the South African government as if it's some bastion of truth. But South Africa is a state drowning in corruption, race-based policy, and farm murders that the international press has been terrified to cover for years. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's documented reality. The videos are out there. We saw 2 of them. And yet, the moment Trump grants asylum to a few dozen victims of that chaos, the media melts down. Why? Because those victims are white. And the one thing modern progressivism cannot tolerate is white suffering that doesn't come with a lecture or a guilt trip attached. This moment reveals something deeply broken in our institutions. The media, academia, and cultural gatekeepers have become obsessed with race, but only when it serves their political ends. They will amplify any story that paints non-white people as victims of systemic injustice, whether it's true or not. But if the narrative flips, if the victims are white farmers being threatened with land seizures, murder, or genocidal rhetoric, suddenly it's silence, or worse, mockery. This is where the ideology of equity has brought us, not to justice, not to healing, but to a place where race determines whether your suffering is acknowledged or ignored, where even the universal human right to flee danger and find safety is filtered through the lens of progressive identity politics. That's not justice, that's a caste system built on resentment. So let's be real, Trump's move to grant asylum to these 59 individuals wasn't just the right thing to do. It was a moral correction in a world gone mad with selective empathy. It exposed the left's framework for what it really is, a hierarchy of victimhood where some lives matter more than others depending on how well they serve the revolution. And make no mistake, the revolution they're after doesn't end in equality. It ends in the destruction of everything that once held this country together. Truth, fairness, and our shared humanity. So if you think this is about helping the marginalized, take another listen to Julius Malema's statements. Shoot to kill, he said in the last clip we watched. He was at a rally, smiling, with many other people chanting that. That's not a freedom fighter. That's a man preparing for a purge. And Sunny Hostin wants you to believe those people are harmless while condemning the refugees fleeing the harm they're actually experiencing. This isn't just a media scandal, it's a moral test, and the people failing it the hardest are the ones who claim to care most about justice, their version of justice.
I'm Governor Westmore all the way.
Westmore is a very good idea.
And if you don't know who he is, you should learn, because to me, he's the most qualified, amazing candidate I've seen in my lifetime.
So you agree?
He will be president.
So you agree with Crockett then?
He's black.
That you can't have a woman.
You can't have a woman.
It's about a woman.
Well, but the thing is that I don't look at people first by he's a woman, a black man, a gay person, and this. I look at the best candidate, and then they happen to have all these other things they bring.
You may be a little different.
You literally just did that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would say that we got to stop telling the American public what they're ready for.
And
we've elected a black man before.
We lost twice when women ran.
Yeah.
I mean,
but is there no distinguishing factors to each woman and why they might have lost? Is there no nuance?
Hillary Clinton was one of the most qualified candidates in presidential.
She carried a lot of Clinton baggage, but she was polarized.
Yeah, but you know what?
She lost
because to a failed game show host.
Yes.
Okay?
I loved her. I voted for her. But the number one thing I heard from people that didn't like her was there was this mystery around the Clinton baggage they took. I just don't trust her.
They weaponized her husband against Hillary Clinton. And the bottom
They did all
line
those
is,
things.
This country is a
Yes.
misogynistic country, and this country is a country that, out of all of the first world countries, hasn't been able to elect a female president.
So
That's just factual.
Do Democrats really want to set the benchmark for competent women at Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris? One's the queen of calculated cynicism, the other can't put down the nervous laughter long enough to finish a sentence. And they're the proof we're told that America is hopelessly sexist and racist. Never mind that Tulsi Gabbard, combat veteran, two-time Congresswoman, sharp on policy, was iced out of the 2020 Democrat primary the minute she crossed the Clinton machine. No. To The View, if their chosen woman loses, the electorate is the problem. But notice what actually happened in the clip. Sara Haines makes a radical suggestion that voters weigh competence before chromosomes, and the panel snaps back like she violated a blasphemy law. That reflex tells you everything about the cultural moment we're currently living in. Progressive gatekeepers have spent a decade preaching that identity trumps merit. Now they can't tolerate dissent even from a friendly voice. It's the same illiberal impulse that turned university safe spaces into ideological quarantine zones. Conformity over conversation at all costs. So how do we get here? Well, three forces converged. First, the post-2016 Democrat apparatus doubled down on demographic determinism. Data-driven consultants promised a permanent majority to Democrat leadership if the party framed every contest as oppressed versus oppressor. Second, corporate media fused ratings with activism. Outrage pays, nuance doesn't. Third, social platforms rewarded tribal loyalty with instant dopamine, punishing any deviation from the script. Just ask Barry Weiss, J.K. Rowling, or the countless academics who discovered that one wrong tweet completely erases your years of work. The irony is that this strategy is backfiring in real time. By insisting that the United States is uniquely misogynistic, The View erases the 75 million voters who chose the nation's first female vice president and alienates independents who prefer issues to grievance bingo. It also masks the Democrats' that being Kamala Harris. Now, the irony is that this strategy is backfiring in real time. By insisting that the United States is uniquely misogynistic, The View erases the 75 million voters who chose the nation's first female vice president, Kamala Harris, when they elected Biden. And that alienates independents who prefer issues to grievance bingo. It also masks the Democrats' policy failures. Clinton lost the Rust Belt workers on trade, not testosterone. Harris's 2024 flameout followed 2 years of economic malaise and open border chaos, not a sudden surge of the patriarchy. When every loss is blamed on bigotry, there's no incentive to self-correct, only to double down on moral grandstanding. So what does this moment actually reveal? Well, once again, the left's cultural dominance, once enforced through academia and legacy newsrooms, is fraying because it treats disagreement as heresy instead of evidence that voters are complex. Americans are increasingly allergic to lectures of this kind that label them as sexist bigots for wanting affordable groceries or a secure border. The more the establishment shouts, "Ism," whatever comes before that, the less it persuades the regular working class person. And as that spell breaks, a genuinely diverse field of leaders, left, right, and independent, will rise or fall on competence again. That's the equality the View claims to champion, but can't quite stomach when it threatens their preferred narrative. So ask yourself, how much longer are you willing to be manipulated by narratives that insult your intelligence and weaponize your decency? How many more times will you let self-appointed elites redefine truth to protect their own failures? We're living in a country where dissent is actively being punished, merit is smeared as privilege, and loyalty to groupthink is rewarded more than love for our country. This isn't just political theater, it's pure cultural decay. And if we don't reclaim the ability to think clearly, to speak freely, and to judge leaders by their actions, not their demographics, then we're not just watching America fall apart, we're participating in her downfall. Now is the time to break ranks with this level of cowardice. Speak boldly, stand for truth, because if we don't fight to preserve what we have left of this country, there won't be anything left to fight for when our kids are actually in charge. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.